Welcome to this week's Codebreakers, the Pandemic Code HOA. Every 6 weeks, we're going to be doing something that's a little bit more of a deep dive. And the one person on our team that really loves to dig into the science of memetics and why things go viral is the codebreaker Craig Calvert from Mindful 360. So,
Hello.
Craig, what are we going to be talking about in the next 40 minutes? What are we breaking down?
Well, one of the things that I think is important, and we've even had offline discussions about this in the past, is that it's one thing to study, Grumpy Cat, certain shows that go viral and try to extract, why are they going viral? What's some pattern that I can see? And to replicate it, because that's really what we're going after. We want to be able to take these ideas and apply them to our businesses and such. We want to be able to create viral content. Well, if all you have are end result examples of successful viral content, that doesn't mean that you understand the underpinnings, the science of why it works in the first place, sort of like the primal triggers that are going on. Once you understand those points, then you're empowered to sort of experiment on your own rather than trying to play the copycat game with existing memes. And so a lot of today's discussion is going to sound like we're talking about, Ebola or the cold virus or something, because we're going to be talking about transmission of viruses. And a lot of the things that apply to biological viruses apply to mind viruses. Very, very same concept. So,
yeah, I just recently reread The Tipping Point.
Excellent book.
It is a really good book, but what was so interesting to me, he talks a number of different times about how there was this theory, people believed something happened because of X, and then they did the hard study of that same thing and why it went, why it tipped, because that book isn't really only about online content. Like this show, our intention is not to only talk about the online content. It's anything that moves forward. But it's really interesting to see how once they did the study, the reason it went viral was completely different than the theories up to that point.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the things that this particular piece of the series is trying to help us achieve is, yeah, okay, we've got all these examples, and it's very interesting to break those down, but every 6 weeks we come back to the basics and touch on another piece of the science.
Well, one thing I think is a good place to start is, where did it even come from? Like the word meme. It was first coined by Richard Dawkins back in the 70s with a book that he wrote called The Selfish Gene. And it was the first concept of treating data points as if they were viruses. Just like I can sneeze and spread a cold virus throughout a room. If my mind virus, an idea, which could be music, a phrase, a picture, it can take on it, it's just data in all formats. It could even be a dance movement, okay? The success at which it transmits is a lot like the success of a cold virus or hepatitis A or any other virus. You know that there are viruses that are very difficult to catch, and then there's other things that they're incredibly easy to catch. I mean, with the flu, all you have to do is basically be in the same room with someone with the flu, and because it's airborne, you can catch it.
Yeah.
Whereas hepatitis C, that requires some pretty direct contact with bodily fluids we don't normally directly contact.
Yeah.
So, well, here's an example. if I want to spread a phrase, I have to think in terms of how easy is it to transmit. If I go, if I'm trying to spread a number, and I want people to chant a number, 42 works. It's memorable. Okay, if we're trying to get people to spread the number 42, that's very easy. If I'm trying to spread the number 47969274231, well, already, if I had you read that number back to me from memory, you'd make a mistake. So therefore, we can say it did not transmit successfully.
Correct.
My idea was too complex. A joke that takes 10 minutes to tell does not spread around the office, the water cooler, the next morning. But if you've got a short punchline, well, then it's easy to transmit because the components of the joke, there's a few enough moving parts that they can be replicated with minimal distortion. You ever played the game, the telephone game, where you have like a line of people and you whisper a sentence to the first person's ear, and they have to keep whispering it, and you see how it comes out the other end? Yeah. Well, there you go. That's distortion in copying. The more distortion, the less it transmits. But the less distortion, the more it will transmit.
Yep, absolutely. On the joke thing, my dad was probably the best joke teller of the 10-minute joke. He could stretch any joke, and the way in which he did it left you just hanging the whole time, trying to figure out where he was going with this joke, and then he'd get to the punchline, and it just dropped you like a brick. But, what that did was set him apart as a master storyteller, which is what he really was. He wasn't a joke teller, he was a storyteller.
And you couldn't turn around to somebody that says, I've only got, 30 seconds. Can you sum up the joke for me? It doesn't transmit that way.
No. Yeah, it's really interesting. And so, like you were saying earlier, there are different kinds of virality, and some of them move through people very quickly, but they're not very dangerous, and some of them don't move very quickly, and they pack a wallop.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Now, I'll go ahead and give an example of a trigger component of a meme. It's called making sense. And I know that sounds super simple, like, well, of course things have to make sense, otherwise they don't transmit. Like, why would you transmit something that doesn't make sense? Well, here's an example. Ever heard music calms the savage beast?
Uh-huh.
That's not what the original statement is. It's music calms the savage breast. But the first time that somebody accidentally, in trying to have it make sense, changed it to beast, that transmitted far and wide much faster than the obscure music calms the savage breast.
Yes.
So that's an example of sometimes things can take an unintended turn once we release an idea, a picture out there, that somebody else misinterprets or twists something and adds a component, and then it becomes viral. Sometimes becoming viral happens after a particular mutation occurs, after it's left your creative mind.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and we see this all the time. I can't remember if it was The Tipping Point or Contagion, but one of those two books dealt with this. There was a whole section on various quotes that have been given credit to somebody in particular. Right. And we can all quote them. We all know who said them. But like the example you just gave, they were far more complex when they were first said. And a couple of the examples, they were actually able to track their movement, and they simplified 2 or 3 times before they finally got to an understandable and requotable point.
Well, that comes down to a very frustrating aspect of memetics, is that it's not the fittest host that prevails. It's the fittest virus that prevails. And here's what that means. Like, if you were to ask any of our, and we have a variety of like SEO experts, web design experts, user interface, people on our team, and any one of them would look at a site such as a Drudge report and go, "Oh, that's ugly. It's hideous. It does everything wrong." But it's the data that they provide. It's the information that they provide that makes them one of the, whether you like them or not, is beside the point. They spread things far and wide. They're a huge transmitter of information viruses.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, one of the ways of looking at the absolute core foundation of memetics, if you're talking about getting deep into the brain, not things get more complex as we get outward in the brain. Okay, and by the time we get to Grumpy Cat, it's got a whole different level of triggers. But let's think about the core ones. They're called the 4 F's. You've got fighting, fleeing, feeding, and we'll just be nice and call it finding a mate for the 4th one. So a lot of those explode into some sub-concepts that we can see, like danger. If I want everybody to watch a particular local news broadcast at 10, could Oreos be killing your kids? More at 10. Well, I've instituted danger. If people perceive that there's a danger in the message, then it increases interest. Okay, mm-hmm. So that's one trigger. Fighting. Even though the Christmas season lasts for half the year, and you can't go 2 feet without seeing Christmas decorations as soon as Halloween is out, you'll still see a lot of the war on Christmas. And that spreads because it's creating danger, plus there's a fight. You're being attacked. This is another way to get a meme to spread very quickly. When you're getting to the finding a mate, well, that's the obvious one that everybody knows. Sex sells. So, duh. Not a lot of news there. But where the triggers get really deep is where you start talking about the structures within the science of memes. Like, for example, there's crisis, mission, problem, danger, and opportunity. So let's take a couple of popular examples. If you have, like, for example, shows like Antique Roadshow,
okay,
or Storage Wars, why did those become so popular? Because it got people thinking about, wow, with low effort, i.e. looking in my attic, I could find something that brings me great reward with low time investment. Why do people buy metal detectors, especially people down here along the beach?
Oh, here in Park City too. There's people that make $20,000 a year by going and hiking the ski resorts.
It's relative low investment with high reward, because you could be the one to find the thing. Somebody who lost their Rolex.
The guy who found a $250,000 wedding ring at Park City Ski Resort about 15 years ago. He's downright famous, okay?
Now, if you're talking about like breaking down a story, like a boy is dying of leukemia. All right, we have a crisis. Before he dies, he wants to see if he can make it to the Guinness Book of World Records. That's a mission. By setting the record for getting the most get well cards, which is distinguishing yourself. Please help him, which is helping children. That's a big meme trigger. By sending a card. Well, sending a card is low risk. You get to participate in this larger thing just by sending a card, or now in the more modern times, by clicking a button on change.org. You know, if you want to look at the most successful change.org petitions, they're usually set up in the same way. The more memetic triggers that you have in your change.org petition, or from a financial perspective, let's call it your Kickstarter campaign. If you start bringing in you can distinguish yourself by being part of the early investors. Well, we're going to give you the promise of a high reward with a low risk if you give us $10. Right? If you structure these things properly, the triggers that you have, then people are going to be drawn into it. It's going to transmit more. They'll share the Kickstarter campaign more. I mean, that's the goal of breaking down memetics. And the empowering thing, this applies to marketing as well as it does to personal use, is that everyone is following a whole range of memetic programs that they didn't put there. They came in from other places.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you shake somebody's hand, you didn't invent the handshake. That concept was transmitted to you. That's not a natural act. When you shake your head up and down to go yes and left to right to go no, that's a transmitted memetic structure, because in Bulgaria, they switched the two. It's very confusing.
When I was in Argentina, I had somebody try and convince me in my first week down there that they were backwards. What was funny is this person had to keep trying to actually pull it off, and they couldn't remember to do it right or wrong, as the case may be.
Well, to think of a recent example of something that was memetically fit, that spread very rapidly, it was the ice bucket challenge.
Yeah.
Because really, all you had equipment, you had to have some ice, water, and some sort of bucket. You had to have a chair and somebody to pour it over you, and the video only had to be just as, 10 seconds. It's not like you had to come up with a script or something. So they had, the components that they had were very easy to transmit, because you could watch it one time and it was simple enough that you instantly would know how you could repeat it yourself. I sit in a chair, I get a bucket of ice water, I get somebody to pour it on me, and then I nominate somebody to do it next.
Mm-hmm.
Done. If they did the ice bucket Macarena dance, if they tried to mix together something complex that required complex movements that had, something you had to do, a dance that you did while having the ice dumped on you, or a long song that you had to learn, that you had to sing while you were getting it. All right, these elements would have raised the complexity, and when other people tried to do them, there would be mutations in the mind virus. It would get distorted, and in most cases, this is the same in nature, mutations are occasionally, in fact, rarely advantageous. They're most often deleterious. Like most mutations are fatal.
Yeah.
And that's just that's the nature of when people in marketing have this mantra of, you have to be simple. You have to communicate clearly. Well, here's why you have to communicate clearly. I mean, it's because the more complex your message is, you're increasing the chances of it being mutated when someone tries to transmit that information to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that clearly I've had to do in my own company, Mindful 360. We've got this incredibly complex offering.
We have had this conversation privately a number of times, Craig.
And so I've had to apply memetic fitness to our own messaging, to really get it down to something as simple as know yourself better, make better decisions,
Yeah.
and then just leave it there. Because if we talk about being, the cognitive blind spot experts, all right, now we're getting a little complex, but it's still transmittable. If I say that we're the experts on protecting yourself from eruptions of the inferior function, now I've created a highly complex meme that will get completely distorted as soon as I try to get it transmitted. And so it'll die. The message dies. That's what we don't want to happen in marketing.
Yeah.
We want our messages to have the equivalent of "Where's the beef?" or "Turn down for what?" We want to have some phrase that everybody recognizes.
Yep. Absolutely. Hey, let's check in with our audience. We've had quite a bit of engagement so far, so I'm going to make some shout-outs really quick. Gina Fidel, of course, in order to fill my Codebreaker commitment, there will be some Wednesdays. I'll be changing my schedule. Basically, this is part of a conversation. I just wanted to read it because I wanted to shout out to Gina, who is the newest member of the Codebreaker team, and so I'm reading this one more as an announcement. Rain Dowell, first-time viewer, she says, this looks like a great HOA. Thanks for the invitation, Dennis. In honoring my calendar, I'll be watching the replay. That's part of a conversation I had with her yesterday. Tim Longwell says, welcome to the Codebreakers. Here we go. Ammon, who has been very active. Well, it is very well to backwards engineer success. It's also important to understand the basic science and not have to just play with a narrow set of things to copy. We've got somebody strange in the audience. I think he's absconded with somebody else's profile picture. Some dude named David Wells. That's what can I say? That is a grisly-looking picture.
It sure is.
He says, howdy, Ammon Johns. Cheryl, hey all, trying to watch, but work is not playing nice. Yeah, well, surgery often doesn't. And then she says, I thought he said 42 was. Yeah, that was back at the time we were talking about special numbers. And again, the classic example was a British Army joke, one where the original message was, send reinforcements, you're going to advance. And after being passed along the line, came out as, send 3 and 4 pence, you're going to dance. Yeah, I need 3 and 4 pence every time I dance. Elaine says, the less distortion, the more it will transmit. Distortion in the medium as well as distortion in the message or meme. What's so interesting is this was said at 10:11, and the conversation that we were having came back around to this point before I could actually bring it up. So it's interesting how that happens. Ammon again, the art of the soundbite, often a very simple point that is intended to encapsulate a broader speech. Often a very dumbed-down version. Here we go, this weird, grisly-looking guy, David Wells. I don't always ask questions in an HOA. I love this so much. This is so freaking funny about memetics. But when I do, I ask, can you explain this in terms of the most interesting man in the world? I actually, before we read some more, I want to touch on that one.
Yes.
Do you have an answer for him there?
I do, because one of the mutations that came out, he didn't become a virus until somebody took an image of him that created a template that says, I don't always blank, but when I do, I blank. That was the template. It was a very simple template.
Yes.
Incredibly simple template. So it allowed for extraordinary levels of replication to a particular image that just had a template involved.
Yeah.
And once that spread, I don't always go to the doctor, but when I do, it's because I can't talk. It's like there's these things that you can just instantly find things to pour into it. So it lets people distinguish themselves very easily. Like, I'm the creator of a meme in a very easy structure. Because it's very important to remember, he did not become a meme until that particular image and that particular format.
So, do you happen to, before we get on to some of these other comments,
You're cutting out.
hold on. Yeah, it's because of your background noise. Can you hear me now, Craig?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
And I'll have my hand on the mute. So.
Okay. So, do you think that it came from the marketers behind the brand, or did that happen organically? Certainly, the benefit to the brand is enormous, because I mean, I'm not a beer drinker, but I can't even hear that sentence without seeing the word, seeing the brand.
Well, what's interesting, and here's why I'm not sure. I haven't done the study to know if they were the ones who started it, but here's why I'm suspicious that they weren't involved. You mentioned the brand. In most representations now, there's no mention of Dos Equis. It's just his picture and the statement.
Yeah.
If you have a younger generation that was not exposed to the original advertising that had the Dos Equis man and the Dos Equis commercials, they're not going to catch the part of the meme that connects this to the Dos Equis. If Dos Equis had engineered this, then they would have made sure that Dos Equis specifically had attention called to it, or at least more called to it in the image than it is. There are times when I have seen memes that were engineered without the help of the public, and then there's times where something catches fire that no one intended.
Yeah.
For example, Absolute Vodka. They were totally the creator of the meme where they take the Absolute bottle and make it into recognizable shapes. That was a brilliant marketing campaign that they've been able to keep going for decades now.
I remember that. The first time I saw it was in early 1980 in a GQ magazine.
So they've infected enough of the human population with the Absolute Vodka meme that now you don't even have to see the word absolute anymore. You could just see a picture of a vodka bottle made up in some scene, and you're like, that's an Absolute ad.
Yeah, and the weird thing is their bottle isn't really that strange. I mean, it's certainly not a pop bottle, but from the standpoint of an alcohol bottle, there is not a lot to that bottle, and yet they own that shape.
One of the most interesting takeaways is using study of memes to explain our bizarre behavior that we see in ourselves and in other people, like superstitions. Why do we avoid walking under ladders? Why do we toss salt over our shoulder? Why do we knock on wood? Well, one thing that can transmit very easily is a cheap insurance meme. Do this one easy thing, i.e. knock on wood or not walk under a ladder, and you'll keep bad things from happening to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you had to go through some complex, incense burning, ritual every time you encountered a ladder to go around it safely, that would not have spread very far. But since the simple meme is all you have to do is not walk under the ladder, which actually has some safety implications anyway. It's not even a dumb superstition.
Yeah. This comment from David ties right into that, pointing out some of the comments Ammon's made. Highlights memetics fitness. The virus doesn't care what your message is, only replication. And I think we could add to that the simplicity of replication.
Well, and here's something without bringing this into I promise this will not be a political discussion, but I'm going to make a general point. A simple wrong will transmit faster than a complex right.
Okay.
So if your message is complex environmental causes, complex social causes, uh, complex equality issues that don't lend themselves to sound bites versus Obama is a Kenyan Muslim terrorist, guess which one transmits faster? Guess which transmits more easily? So if you wonder why can a stupid message prevail, it's because it was crafted well. It was simple. And a lot of times when our initiatives, things that are important to us, when they fail, it's because we made the message too complex, that we didn't take the time to strip it down to some core triggers and let those do the work for us.
Yeah. And it's not that easy to strip it down, you know.
No.
I've been doing HOA production for a year, and then if you go back and look at my G+, my messaging has changed considerably, to the point where now I'm kind of putting out there that I'm an engagement person. But I've had to, like, experience what happened, the glaze over somebody's eyes when I start to explain what I do, and they're like, what? You know?
Expertise, when properly explored, simplicity is the result. I mean, that's the thing. If you looked at my early years as a musician, I was blazing as fast as I could go, wheedly, wheedly, wee, as complex chord structures, and just going wild, almost, very flashy period of my life. And now, and as I get older, I've moved into finger-style singer-songwriter songs, which are incredibly difficult to play. It's hard to play that simple. When you play simple, every mistake screams out.
Yes.
And that's something to bring incredible attention to, is that this is why simplicity is the answer to virtually every message you want to get out.
Yes. Actually, on the simplicity thing, I mean, it's snowing outside. Ski season is getting close here in Park City. But the Deer Valley Ski Resort actually has hired the professional Olympian skier from Sweden. The guy's like 80 years old now, but his name's Stein Eriksson. And Stein just skis all day long, and he's literally an ambassador for the resort. But the thing is that Stein's style is so simple, so clean, so tight, that literally I can tell that Stein Eriksson is the skier I'm looking at when he's, appears to be a quarter-inch tall. There's no ski up straight position that is just abnormal, and it creates just an unbelievably fluid look that I've never seen anyone able to mimic his style, but it really is an awesome branding for Deer Valley, because everybody wants to meet this guy, and definitely every weekend and most weekdays, and you can tell it is from the lifts, but it's the simplicity that telegraphs his message.
Well, one of the things that I'm going to add and a link to the event page, just so everyone has access to it. It's my most recommended book for people that want to, if they just want to read one book on memetics and not do what I've done and read 30 books on memetics. Like, if you just want to pick one that kind of gets you a good solid foundation and covers most of the bases, and it's Virus of the Mind, and the author is Richard Brody, B-R-O-D-Y. Incidentally, he was the old Microsoft guy that when everybody else was creating word processor software that was called WordPerfect and WordStar, and he was the first one to go, how about we just call the Microsoft product Word?
Yeah.
So that he was big on in the early days of memetics, and his book is fabulous. And the link that I'll provide is I've created a Reader's Digest version of that book that will help understand the big points and help be a good reference for marketers and people that are trying to create viral content. This will be sort of like a science template, if you will. And I make it to where it's no login or anything. It's just a publicly available Google document. So I'll get those links up as soon as I'm done today.
There you go. That's awesome. That kind of stuff is the gold, that really people can start to digest this stuff and run with it. Let's touch base, Craig, on a couple more comments that I want to share. Ammon, of course, always loves to be funny. They have Antique Roadshow in the U.S. too. In our version, many of the antiques are older than the U.S. is.
When I lived in the Czech Republic, I lived in a building that predated the birth of the U.S. So
yeah,
it's amazing perspective.
Yeah, Europe certainly changes things for us. So, all right, we've got handshake. Oh, we're going to this one. Handshakes are so old that they date back to when you were checking the person didn't have a hidden danger up their sleeve. Showing an empty weapon hand is still an almost universal greeting. I lived in Argentina for a while, and when you're in Argentina and you're eating, you have to keep your left hand up on the table at all times and eat with your right hand, which is very abnormal, especially for Americans. And so I literally carried a piece of bread in my hand, but the reason is that same reason that Ammon's talking about here. It's a sign of distrust that you put your hand on your lap, and that's because the gauchos used to carry knives or guns, and if their hand was down, it probably was pulled. So, yeah, there's a couple more comments from the show today.
Well, and on the handshake thing, I would point out that the handshake is universal, but there are many memetic variations on the handshake. There's the fist bump. There's hand up in an arm wrestling. There's hand down. There's the strong handshake, the weak handshake, the barely holding on handshake, the left-handed royal handshake.
The African royal handshake, which is this and then up, right? Which seems so weird to me, because to me that's, a cultural subset here in America, and yet that's the only way that you shake hands with African royalty. So, yeah.
Things can be transmitted from the damnedest places. That's
absolutely true.
It's something that politicians have to be very careful about, because what ends up happening is they'll have a 10-minute speech, and somebody will extract 4 seconds, and that becomes the primary message that gets shared. If a politician says, what I think would be a really bad idea would be starving children to death. And then it turns into getting starving children to death. All by itself. You're like, see, he wants to starve kids.
Yeah. Yep. All right, so we are at our last minute, and I know you've got an appointment at 43 after the hour.
In 2 minutes.
In 2 minutes. Yeah. So let's wind down. Craig, go ahead and give us your closing thoughts on today's show. Yeah, hit us with that.
Glad to. So my closing thoughts is that if we're going to talk about what's the easiest, simplest thing to transmit from this, is that when you study the science of memetics, the outcome is that you need to keep things incredibly simple and easy to translate. If you want your website, this came up in another one of Ammon Johns' HOAs. So what should I name my website? Well, if you a good rule would be if your website is something that you can scream across a crowded pub, and the next morning when the people are hungover, they still remember what your website is, then you've got a golden name, because you found someone that through all that distortion could make it to the other side and come out okay. So that's the key to simplicity. That's why simplicity works. It's not a creative constraint. You can still be creative, but it's good to use these basic rules to help you know. You can't break the rules until you understand them, right? And this is a way of increasing your ability of getting your content out there and creating more viral content by being 10 times simpler than you think you need to be.
Yeah. Certainly something I could work on.
Well, I think we can all work on that. This is a cross that all of us on the Codebreakers team, we bear.
Yeah,
This
it's true.
is our Achilles heel.
Yep.
Everybody on the team has got extraordinary talent, and sometimes it's hard to transmit that talent with simplicity.
Well, you know, we've talked about it a lot. You know, the point that in the back end comments of the Codebreakers, that, you know, none of us have had anything go viral. Well, my answer to that, and Ammon's has been the same each time that's been brought up. Yeah, but how many of the people who have had stuff go viral could actually explain why? Those are two totally different people.
That's
An
like saying
architect could design a house, but he couldn't build one, and a builder could build a house, but he couldn't design one.
There was Mike Tyson's trainer that I bet couldn't beat up Mike Tyson.
Oh, I'm sure he could.
A boxing trainer is a separate skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I need to bring mine to a close because
Yes.
there's also this memetic structure of timeliness that's
Yes.
important. And I will get those links up on the site page before I go to bed tonight.
Okay. And next week we're going to be talking about the hit song, It's All About the Bass. Yeah. No trouble. I mean treble.
I can hardly wait. All right. Take care, my friend.
Bye-bye.